So, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who've watched our episode with Phil Warne, which came out a while back now, will notice that Phil and I are wearing, for continuity purposes, the same clothes as we were that time, and we didn't film this in the same day, did we, Phil? No. Yeah, he's an honest man. He'd say yes. Listen, welcome back to a very special mini-series on the Canary Room. It's called The Masters, and what I've wanted to do across this series, as I've previously said in episode, is speak to, you know, not just who I regard as the best of the best, but the best of the best in their variety, not just, for a couple of seasons, but for decades. And of course, when it came to the Border Fancy, there was only one man who we would speak to, and that is, of course, the legend that is Phil Warne. So, Phil, it is a pleasure. It is a pleasure to be in your company. Your achievements on the bench for Borders are unmatched, unrivaled, and I am going to say this quite confidently, will never be repeated. He's too modest. But
it's sad, isn't it? But yeah.
But I think, if you think about the work that you have done in building the Cotswold border line, is that right?
Yes,
yeah.
This is right.
The Cotswold border line, the success that it's had for you in this country, and people who've taken birds from you and have produced winning birds as well from them. So it's not just that you've had that success. That success has happened both across Europe and when we could, I guess, across the world as well, that people have had that line of birds in their stud, really sort of taking things to a next level. It's fair to say that you literally sort of set the standard in what the modern day border of the time that you were showing it looked at, and people would say, and I'm not sure how you take this or not, that's a Phil Warne border. I remember watching Terry Kelly's video actually on Fifes, where he bred some borders back in the day, and he said that just looks like a Phil Warne border, and
that's the compliment.
Yeah. So Phil, if for those people who are thinking about building a quality line of Border Fancy canaries, if we can sort of distill this down to, let me just start by saying there are no shortcuts. It takes time, it takes commitment, it takes dedication, it takes understanding. So if you're watching this video to think, I'll find out in 20 minutes how to do it, you will, but it will take you years to put into practice. I think that's
very true. Yes.
I think that's the first thing to say. But if we just sort of distill it into 5 key areas, Phil, for you. And the first being, the acquisition of your initial stock. So for the would-be Border Fancier now, what would your advice be in making those first acquisitions?
Well, first of all, get a few canaries from a pet shop or a breeder, but better still from a breeder, and play around breeding them first year to see how you get on and see how it goes. If you decide on a particular strain, for example, of Fife or Borders or whatever it is you're interested, go to the shows and look for somebody that's not just taken best in show. It could be a freak bird, or somebody is consistently getting birds in the top 7 tickets.
Yeah.
And that is the person to have a chat to. Have a word with them and explain exactly that you're a beginner, you want to start off with a stud of birds, and ask them what they advise in the way where they should start with and what sort of money we're looking for, and establish a nice little stud of birds, and perhaps after the first or second season get some advice on about what you've bred, and sell your surplus and go back to that person and get another good stock bird, even a good cock bird to go 2 or 3 hens, and look at your stud and work out the best young birds you've bred and put those 2 birds that bred those birds back together again. So you're establishing a line straight away.
Yeah.
don't be scared to ask for advice. You'll find all top breeds are always happy to give advice. To matters on food, how much, what to do, what size cages to use, what show cages, where to get them from. Ask as many questions as you can. And you could actually Google it online or come to somebody like yourself and ask questions.
Or you.
Yeah. So the more advice you can get, the better.
Yeah. And I think that's important, isn't it? For those sort of... I think the thing is, you can never... I've been keeping canaries for 30-odd years or so now. Perhaps longer if you count Fifi, the canary we had in a cage way back when. But you never stop learning, and I think the important thing is to have that openness of mind, isn't it? So that acquisition, and you talk about making that can be critical, can't it? Because acquiring birds from the right source, and I think you make a really good point there. I think one of the challenges people have is that they look at a stud of birds, and with different varieties of birds, a person can do well because they've bred a one-off. And they can win a lot of shows with it, and certainly in some of the varieties, not so much in the Fife, but some of the varieties, a bird can do well across the season. The Fifes tend to do well for a couple of shows, and then they go under, and they don't have that. I know certainly in the Norwich or in the Gloucesters, a Gloucester that wins early will be a Gloucester that does quite well across the show season. I don't know if that's the same in the Borders.
In Borders quite often, I always used to say, if you get a good team of birds out to London, the southern border, then all the judges around to see them and so on, and it gets in their heads subconsciously. Yeah. They get that bird put up through the season. Yeah. So I think one of the things is looking at those at the people who are there, sort of consistently over a period of time, and then making those first acquisitions, and then linked to that, I guess, is our second point, which is understanding the type of bird that you want to create and how that interpretation of that bird reflects the model. Yes, here again, doing your research is very, very important. When you go to a breeder to get your first birds, don't expect him to sell you his best birds. Don't forget it's the blood you're buying, and with that blood you're going to, if it's a good breeder, you're going to produce good birds. So you don't have to go in and buy expensive birds to start off with. Just get the blood going and establish itself. It's very challenging, as with Borders, I expect Fife would be the same in my case anyway. They go through a stage of looking absolutely superb as babies, in nest feather. Yeah. Then they start dropping feathers, and you think, they come through the molt, and they haven't. And they can change, and they're very deceptive. So have a little bit of patience. It's very frustrating for a new person. You imagine you putting a suit on, you're going out for a special do, and your wife comes up to you and says, well, put your collar right. And it's exactly the same with a bird. It's putting a coat on. Yeah. And some birds put coats on differently to others. So if you've got the blood, be patient. It will come through in the end, but you might think, it's the end of the season now, they shouldn't be molting anywhere, they're finished. But no, some of the feathers, especially in the neck and around the rump, take longer to come through. And sometimes the head as well can really say, that's a nice bird, it's got a poor head. You just wait. It's very short feathers ahead. Yeah. They take a long time to come through.
Yeah. And I think that's important, isn't it? I think one of the things, and we talked upstairs earlier on about the sort of the patience of people, and everyone wants something sort of quickly. And it doesn't work like that with livestock of any pedigree. And I think you talk about, the blood. And the temptation, I think, for anyone trying to shortcut and thinking, okay, well, I'll blend this blood with this blood. And often that doesn't work, and it doesn't work. And you've mentioned it before, that, that sort of reversion back to wild type, as you call it, is is there.
Nature.
Yeah.
Nature.
Yeah. And essentially, you know, as exhibition type canary breeders, we're trying to battle against that nature, aren't we?
You to start off with your birds, you've got to get the right bird, the birds you like, pair them how you like them, and establish a bloodline, and then look to improve it. And the thing is, when you start to do well at shows and so on, people will be jealous and they'll come up to you, I like your bird, but it's not long enough on the leg or something like that. They'll be telling you the points that you should be hearing, and you don't realise at the time, but they're doing you a favour.
Yeah.
You know, because it's just jealousy. I find that it's helped me an awful lot to start off with. They fed up with me taking best in show. Let's go and find something wrong with Phil. Hey, Phil, it's a nice bird, but... oh, thank you. I'll make a note of that.
Yeah, but I think that there's a really important point there, Phil, isn't there? Because I think one of the things is that sort of honesty with ourselves, which is about there isn't a perfect bird. It hasn't been bred. There are some that got very bloody close, but there isn't, and a number of them have come from this room. But there isn't really a perfect bird. So it is about maintaining that critical eye, isn't it? Right the way through.
Yeah, you've got to accept also the judge's decision, because sometimes you find a judge, if he lacks, for example, in his own stud, a bird with a good head, he'll look to put best in show a bird with a good head. It's a subconscious that they don't realise. So you've got to have a little bit of leeway. Yeah. You know, you can have a team of birds. You can have one team of 4 or 5 judges go in there and judge them. You have those same birds an hour later and ask for another team of judges, and they'll come up entirely different.
Completely different order. Yeah.
I mean, as soon as I walk in the show and I haven't taken best in show, Phil, come and see this, see that. You know, they want to show that bird should have taken best in show. Yeah. Everybody's got different interpretations.
Yeah, and I think the thing as well is we know only too well that the bird at 9 o'clock in the morning when it's judged and the bird at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when people are walking around can often be very different depending on the, you know, I've found in the past, if a bird's gone next to a white, which is why I have whites in my room, if a bird's gone next to a white, it can get completely spooked and go to pieces if it's never seen one before. So you know,
even whites spook other whites.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Which reminds me, I put a fawn in with a variegated white, which are both right ground birds, and they both went mad. You're absolutely right. So I think the sort of, you know, getting the initial stop, being then focused. And then I suppose point 3, Phil, would be, and we chatted about this in the earlier episode, but point 3 would be about the sort of meticulous nature of your record keeping, and really, and it's an expansion on point 2, but really assessing your birds for the good points and the bad points and the average points, so that when you come to your breeding programme, that you are absolutely doubling up on good and exceptional and not good and average.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to go through everything. I mean, a good exercise is you're pairing your birds up. Pretend you've got a novice, a junior there, and you're telling them what to do. Don't be frightened when you're on your own. Say, well, look, get this cock and pair with this hen because. Explain it. And for beginners, I think double buffing and double yellowing. If you double buff, you're going to get thick necks, short cobby birds and short legs. It's not that they got short legs, it's because they got dense feather. It makes their legs don't look quite so long. Yeah. You double yellow, you've got opposite. You're going to have a fine, thin neck. You probably have a narrower back because of the way the yellow feather lies down flatter, and you'll have longer legs. So when you're pairing buff to yellow, try and compensate for both. You've got a little bit of each, and that's why we pair yellow to buff.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about the sort of the pairing side of things, I think the art of a stockman, and you've demonstrated this over many decades, the art of a stockman is in the pairings, and that's really, I guess, point 4 on this, isn't it? Which is when you're looking at pairing your birds, it isn't just about yellow to buff, it's about the overall qualities, and it's about the expected outcome. And then many of the experienced champion fanciers will absolutely utilise one cockbird over a multiplicity of hens to get him out there.
And that's a good idea. Yeah, that's a good idea for anybody at any stage, really.
Yeah.
You get the background birds. What you've done is you have eliminated the wild gene. You've conquered it.
Yeah.
But those birds are ready to conquer it back again. So it's always a challenge.
I think that's the important thing, Phil. When you look at that, it is that sort of. It does come back sometimes. Even our meticulous record keeping, meticulous pairing, absolute sort of focus on the model, talking to yourself in the room, everyone, all of those things. You are fighting nature, and nature will always win.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so I guess our sort of final thing, Phil, which talks about the numbers of birds. And it can be quite difficult for people to get trios, as we joked about off camera, because we always seem to breed more cocks than hens. But in terms of the number of birds, and then the number of sort of birds that you're breeding to maintain at the top, in our episode on the Canary Room, you talked about with the borders, you breed a couple of hundred odd borders, and you'd have incubators, and you'd do all of those things. Obviously, it's all about quality, but do numbers matter as well? I mean, you want both, don't you? Quality and quantity.
Yeah, you need to look at a whole family of birds, and you can then come to a conclusion where they're lacking and where they're dominant in, and that's important. And write it down. Yeah. And if you like it so much, then pair that same pair back together again to keep it going. All related birds, inbreed related birds that particular way. But as for numbers, you want enough birds to be able to choose. You don't want to have a wonderful hen there that's got lovely head and a lovely leg, and you've got this cock, and she needs probably a bit more quality, but you've got this cock and it can't compensate with the same things that we actually need for that particular bird. So we need to choice of cockbirds for her, to get it just right. If you're limited, you're going back to square one again. Yeah,
and I think that's the thing, isn't it? You often, if you don't have that quantity with quality, then the temptation is to use an inferior bird on it, and then all you do is take yourself back, doesn't it? Right. Really? And so I think having that volume of birds, and absolutely got to make sure that you've got the right surroundings for them, the right husbandry to be able to cope with that, and also you've got the amount of time to do it, because
that's what I'm going to say. That's important. It's a hobby. You got to enjoy it. If you're not enjoying it, something's wrong. If you've got too many birds and you can't get rid of them, or you go only the pet shop I have and that sort of thing, then you are breeding too many. So what's comfortable for you? And always leave plenty of space in your room in case anything goes wrong, so you've got to clean something out and that sort of thing. Quite often you have an infestation of mite or that sort of thing, and you need somewhere to put the birds or whatever. I have had systems in the past whereby I've had to quarantine birds, put them separate before they can go abroad and so on. But you want space in your room. You don't want to be overcrowded. Overcrowded isn't bad. So what's good for you? Yeah. What's good for you in ventilation, what's good for you in heat, what's good for you in lighting is good for the birds.
Yeah. And I guess the final thing, so I've just added 6 on, Phil. I've added 6. I said 5. This is a bonus one. One of the things which you are synonymous with is the feather quality on your canaries. Now that hasn't happened by accident, Phil, has it? And in the episode that we did with you talked about trimming round the rump and seeing the sort of the vent and seeing the sort of thickness and of the feather around there, whether it was a short feather or a long feather. The feather takes time, doesn't it? And so for there are obviously yellow and buff. But there is a gradient right the way in between, isn't there?
There is, yes. And I think to get a good look at your birds, it's an idea to get a hot spray, pretty hot, and pump up gun and really blast the birds with a hot spray. Perhaps a couple of days afterwards, you get a cool spray with something in with it to help the plumage. But that hot spray will actually burst little pin feathers you can't see, a hidden one, and you'll see a bird transform from that. From there, you can assess the feather, and I think we spoke before about this. It's not a sort of thing that you can do instantly. It's years and years of practice. You'll catch your eye for it, and you sort of drop in. I know a friend of mine is a doctor in the United States. He used to take all the feathers out of every bird on the rump and stick them on a card and send me the card at Christmas to sort out what bird good. And I used to scratch my head. I lost all my hair, you know.
Yeah, that's some kind of Christmas card, isn't it? Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas, Phil. How would you pair these birds?
That's right. It wasn't quite like that, but similar. And that's very difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, you take a feather out from just a half inch away from an earlier feather out, it'd be different length and different thickness and webbing. But if the webbing's very, very wide, it is more or less tight to be a buff.
Yeah.
If it's long, it's going to be yellow. And I think definition of a bird helps what sort of feather you pair with it. If you've got a bird, as I was saying earlier on, that's thin in the neck, and you want just to brown make it a little bit bigger to balance the bird, then use a buff on it.
Yeah.
With my whites, the secret with a good white is to use a normal from a white and put it to an unrelated white. Well, it can be distantly related white line. So you'll get a bird bred from whites seems a little bit more washed out than normal.
Yeah.
And that's ideal for a white.
Yeah.
And a Fife breeder told me that back 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And he won everything virtually.
Yeah.
And that's what the secret was. So you got to, you'll pick up these things as you go along. But you can't just say, well, grab somebody and say, well, look, pair this bird to that bird. You don't know why you're saying, but that feather's right.
Yeah.
And it comes with time.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? And as we wrap up this little episode, I think that the key takeaways are, do your research, fixate that bird that you want in your mind, and then make sure that you give the birds the time, because actually being at the top for as many decades as you can,
Got to give them the time.
is the time in. Well, listen, Phil, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for sharing your knowledge.
No problem at all.
You're an absolute legend. Thanks,
Thank you.
mate. Cheers.